If someone had told me the plan included a male disguise and PR smile, I would have called it a fantasy. The first time I saw Valerie Locke, she didn't look real. She looked like she'd stepped out of a high-fashion spread, tall, commanding, carved cheekbones and red lips that never smiled without cause. Power in heels, control in human form. And now she was my boss. I'd been at Locke PR for 2 weeks, hired as a junior assistant in creative strategy. When I started hearing the whispers, ruthless with clients, colder with staff, no one lasted more than 3 months under her. But none of the rumors prepared me for what happened when she called me into her office. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because I had spilled coffee on my shirt that morning, changed into the emergency button-up I kept in my locker, and tried to make it through the day without drawing attention. I was seated at my desk, buried in brand storyboards, when her assistant, Marisol, appeared beside me. "Miss Locke wants to see you now." I looked up, startled. "Me? Yes. And don't keep her waiting." My heart stuttered in my chest as I stood. I'd never even spoken to Valerie Locke beyond a polite good morning in the elevator. Why the hell did she want me? Her office was on the top floor behind two glass doors that seemed to hum with tension. I stepped in carefully, my voice caught in my throat. She didn't look up at first, just gestured to the chair in front of her desk. "Close the door." I obeyed. She finally raised her eyes and they pinned me in place. Dark, intelligent, unreadable. "Your name is Jordan, correct?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, trying not to squirm. "You've been here 2 weeks." "That's right. You have a background in theater." That caught me off guard. "How do I make it a point to know the full profiles of my staff?" she said. "You majored in communications with a minor in performance, stage work, correct?" "Yes. And you used to do gender-bending roles in school productions." My heart skipped occasionally. "Yes. Why?" She stood from her chair slowly, walking around her desk, heels clicking like punctuation. "Because I need a favor, a very specific favor, and I believe you might be the only person capable of executing it without question." I blinked, confused. "Okay, what kind of favor?" Valerie moved to a sleek cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a black folder. "There's a networking gala tomorrow night. High-end, exclusive, highly monitored. Normally, I would attend alone, but this year, an investor from a conservative firm made it clear they would be bringing a guest, a male companion. They assume incorrectly that I will do the same." She turned and handed me the folder. I opened it. Inside was a men's suit, or rather a high-end tailored design board for one. Dark navy, slim cut, subtle pinstripes, masculine, sharp. "I don't understand," I said. "You want me to dress as a man, accompany me, play the part of my companion. Why not bring someone else, a man?" "Because I don't trust men to keep their mouth shut," she said simply. "You, however, are under contract and have a theatrical background. You'll follow directions. You won't get ideas and you won't enjoy it." That last part hit like a slap. I swallowed. "So, I pretend to be your date for the night in disguise." "Not a date," she said, her voice low. "A distraction. I want the press watching the wrong things. I want their attention focused on the unexpected." I looked down at the sketch. The model was lean, androgynous, almost me. I had played male roles before. Young lords, revolutionaries, even Romeo once. My features could shift, blur. I could pass. And what happens if someone figures it out? They won't. She stepped closer. I could smell her perfume, sharp jasmine, and something darker underneath. "But if they do, we give them a scene." "A scene?" Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "A convincing kiss." My mouth went dry. "You want me to kiss you?" "If it becomes necessary to maintain the illusion." "Exactly." I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of which made it to my lips. Valerie turned, walking back to her desk. "You'll find the suit waiting in the styling department. Fitting at 5. Don't be late. I stood there for another full second before whispering, "Why me?" She paused, looking over her shoulder. Her gaze dipped down my body slowly, deliberately. "Because you're curious enough to say yes and foolish enough to think you'll come out of it unchanged." I left her office in a daze, the door closing silently behind me. That evening, the fitting was done in silence. The tailor adjusted lapels and cuffs while I stood there watching my reflection shift from Jordan the assistant to someone else entirely. My chest was bound beneath a crisp shirt. My jaw seemed sharper. My walk changed when I looked in the mirror. I wasn't me. I was whoever she wanted me to be, and I didn't know whether to be terrified or excited. The next evening, the car picked me up at 7 sharp. The driver opened the door, and there she was. Valerie Locke in a black gown that shimmered like midnight oil, slit high, neckline low. Her hair slipped back into something wicked. She looked at me, expression unreadable. "You'll do." We arrived at the gala 10 minutes later. Cameras flashed, murmurs rose. I stepped out and offered my hand, and she took it without hesitation. From this moment on, she whispered against my ear, "You are no longer Jordan. You are Victor Gale, private investor, and you are mine." I swallowed hard. Understood. The night blurred. We mingled. We drank. I stood at her side, holding her coat, whispering scripted phrases. And somewhere between the second champagne flute and the 5th compliment about how handsome I looked, I realized something was changing. Not just the way people saw me, but the way she did. Her glances lingered longer. Her touches became more intentional. Her body curved toward mine. And just after midnight, in a corner of the terrace where no one could hear us, she leaned in, placed her fingers on the lapels of my suit, and whispered, "They're watching." I nodded, then kissed me. My lips barely had time to part before hers were on mine. Hot, fierce, demanding. It wasn't a stage kiss. It wasn't for the crowd. It was real. Hungry. Her nails grazed the back of my neck. Her breath was sharp. And when she finally pulled away, eyes dark, voice ragged, she said, "That was the easy part. Tomorrow we talk about what happens next." I didn't sleep that night. After the gala, after the car ride in suffocating silence, with Valerie seated inches away from me, after the kiss that was supposed to be for appearances, but felt like a lit match dropped into gasoline, I went home and stared at myself in the mirror for hours. I didn't take off the suit. I didn't unbind my chest. I just sat on the edge of my bed, still in costume, still in character, wondering if what had happened between us had been real or just another manipulation. Valerie Locke didn't need anything from anyone. That was what everyone said. She took, she commanded. She owned the room the moment she walked in. And yet last night on that terrace, under the weight of camera flashes and the hum of conversation just around the corner, she had kissed me like she couldn't help it, like she'd been waiting, wanting. And the terrifying thing was I had kissed her back like I'd been starving. The next morning, I showed up to work at 8:57 sharp, trying to look normal in my usual pencil skirt and blazer, hair tied back, makeup subtle. No one looked at me twice. No one knew. At least that's what I told myself. But when I walked past Marisol's desk and she raised one brow with the faintest smile, I knew better. "She wants you," Marisol said simply. In her office, my throat tightened. Did she say why? No, tone neutral, but with that look in her eyes. I hesitated at the door for a half second before knocking twice and stepping inside. Valerie sat behind her desk, dressed in a dark wine-colored blouse that clung to her like silk on glass, lips painted deep red, hair twisted back in that severe, elegant way that made her cheekbones even sharper. She looked up the moment I entered. "Close the door." I did. The click of the latch felt louder than it should have. She didn't speak immediately. She simply gestured to the chair across from her. I sat. My heart was already pounding. "You performed well last night," she said at last, her voice smooth, unaffected, convincing, elegant, unrecognizable. "Thank you," I said, trying to match her tone. I assume it worked more than I anticipated. The gossip has shifted. They think I'm discreetly dating a male investor. The attention's been redirected just as I planned. I waited for the next part. The butt and the kiss. I asked, regretting it the second the words left my mouth. Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp, necessary. Just that. I tried to keep my voice steady. She stood and walked slowly around the desk, stopping in front of me. Stand up. I obeyed, confused but curious. She studied me. My face, my clothes, my posture. Then she reached forward, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear with a touch that was far too gentle to mean nothing. You looked more confident in the suit, she murmured. More dangerous. I felt different, I admitted. I liked the way you looked at me. She tilted her head. And how was that? Like you wanted to tear me apart. Her lips curled just slightly. You noticed. I swallowed. You weren't pretending, were you? A pause then. No. My breath caught. She stepped closer. There's something about you when you're not you. When you're letting go of the softness. When you disappear into something sharp. That version of me was just a costume. Was it? She reached for my hand and lifted it slowly, then placed it over her waist, her body warm and steady beneath the silk. Did it feel like acting when you kissed me? No, I whispered. Good, she said, because I need you to do it again. My pulse thundered. Now, not here. If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below. It's the one with the heart and $sign icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating awesome videos for you. She stepped back, the space between us suddenly electric. There's an after-hours event Friday night. One of our clients is launching a luxury menswear line. The room will be full of old money and private press. I want to distract them, and you're going to help me as Victor again. Yes, but this time you won't just be a companion. You'll be my lover. I could barely breathe. Why me? Because I can't stop thinking about the way you looked at me in that suit. And because I want to know what it feels like when you take control. I froze. Are you saying you want me to dominate me? She finished, eyes burning. Yes, publicly. Just a little enough for them to believe it. I stared at her speechless. She stepped back behind her desk, her expression now perfectly unreadable. You can say no, she said, casually flipping open a folder. This isn't part of your job description, but it is a command, I said, voice low. Her eyes flicked back to mine, and this time she smiled. Friday, 7 o'clock. Fitting is at 4 o'clock. I want to see you in black this time. Clean lines, tighter around the waist. I nodded, pulse still spiking. And the kiss longer, she said without looking up. Much longer. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. And Jordan, yes, don't make the mistake of thinking I've lost control. I looked at her, haven't you? Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her gaze. Just for a moment. Not yet. The rest of the week passed in a haze of adrenaline and anticipation. Every time I passed her in the hallway, every glance, every accidental brush of fingers felt like a fuse waiting for a spark. And by the time Friday arrived, I wasn't nervous. I was ready. When I stepped into the Meridian Pavilion that night, the world blurred. The suit clung to me perfectly, black, tailored to my exact measurements. My hair was slicked back. My walk was sharper. My voice dropped an octave. I wasn't Jordan anymore. I was Victor Gale, her lover, her secret, her weapon. And when she approached me in a silver dress that barely kissed her thighs, heels like daggers and eyes full of fire, I didn't wait for a cue. I took her hand, pulled her into me, and kissed her like it wasn't pretend. She melted against me, lips opening, her breath catching when my hands gripped her waist tight. We weren't acting anymore. Not even close. When we pulled apart, her lips were swollen. Her cheeks flushed and her voice shook when she whispered, "That was a mistake. No, I said against her neck. That was the truth. The next morning, I woke up with her taste still on my lips. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, heart still thudding from the way her body had pressed against mine, the way her fingers had curled into the lapel of my suit when I kissed her. Like it wasn't a role, like it wasn't a game, like she was mine. And she had let me. She hadn't stopped me, hadn't corrected me, hadn't whispered enough. She had gasped into my mouth and clung to me like she wanted to be taken. Not like Valerie Locke, CEO and Queen of Glass Towers, but like Valerie, the woman flushed, breathless, undone. I couldn't tell where the performance ended and the truth began anymore. And maybe that was the point. Monday morning, I entered the office dressed as myself. Jordan again. No suit, no sharp lines, just me, smaller, softer. But when I passed her office and caught the way her eyes flicked up, paused on me for a fraction longer than necessary, and then dropped to her laptop without a word, I felt that same pull again. That heat, that hunger. She was remembering just like I was. I sat at my desk and tried to work. Tried to focus on the product brief I had been assigned. But every time my fingers hit the keyboard, I saw her lips, heard her voice. I want to know what it feels like when you take control. Around noon, Marisol approached with a message. She wants you in her office. No rush. But don't make her wait. My chest tightened. Did she say what it's about? No, Marisol said, giving me a glance that was far too knowing. But you'll want to fix your lipstick. I knocked twice. Come in, Valerie said, her voice as even as ever. I stepped inside. She didn't look up. She was wearing a dark green blouse tucked into high-waisted slacks. Every inch of her as immaculate as usual. Close the door. I obeyed. She still didn't look at me. You left the gala early, she said. So did you. You didn't wait for instructions. You didn't seem like you had any to give. Finally, her gaze met mine. You were bold. You told me to be. You enjoyed it. I stepped closer, my pulse steady despite the electricity crackling beneath my skin. You did, too. A pause. Yes. That admission hit like a slap, soft but searing. She stood from her desk slowly and walked around it, stopping directly in front of me. The space between us was thin enough to vanish with a breath. We have a problem, she said quietly. Define problem. I can't stop thinking about you. Not like this. Not like an employee. Then don't, I said, eyes locked on hers. You think this is simple? She asked. You think I can just want you and not tear down everything I've built to have you? You already started? I whispered. You kissed me twice in public. You didn't care about the cameras. Her voice dropped. Do you want me to care? No. Then what do you want? I didn't hesitate. I want you to lose control again. She let out the faintest laugh, shaky and low. I've built an empire on control. Then burn it down, I said, stepping into her until her back hit the edge of the desk. Just for a second. Just for me. Her breath hitched, and in that moment I knew I had her. I tilted my head down, lips brushing hers. Say it. What? She whispered. That you want it. She didn't say it. She grabbed the front of my blouse and pulled me into a kiss that stole every thought from my brain. It wasn't polite. It wasn't careful. It was all teeth and breath and desperation. She kissed me like she was furious about wanting me, furious at herself, furious at me, furious that this was real. Her hand slid into my hair, tangled there, anchoring herself to me. I gripped her hips and lifted her effortlessly onto the edge of her desk, her legs parting for me without hesitation. You like this, I whispered into her mouth. You like being taken. Don't flatter yourself, she breathed, but her hands never stopped. It's just the illusion. Then let me keep pretending. I kissed down her throat and her head tilted back, lips parted, breath shallow. No one's ever touched you like this, have they? Don't. Not like a man. Not like someone who sees both your strength and your need. She moaned, quiet, controlled, but real. You're playing a dangerous game. then stop me. She didn't. Her legs hooked around my waist, fingers cinching the back of my neck. When I looked at her, she was flushed lips swollen, hair slipping from its perfect twist. Look at you, I breathed. Not so untouchable now. She kissed me again, slower, deeper. When we finally parted, her voice was a whisper. This can't happen again. Why not? Because I won't want to stop. I rested my forehead to hers. Then don't. But she stepped back, smoothing her blouse, her tone sliding into cool professionalism like a mask snapping into place. Back to your desk, Jordan. That's all for now. I hesitated. Say my name again. The other one. Her eyes flicked up, and she gave it back like a secret she hated surrendering. Victor. I left her office dizzy, my body still trembling from her touch. At my desk I tried to breathe, to forget, but I couldn't. For the first time in my life I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Jordan. Victor. Both. Neither. One thing was certain. Valerie Locke had seen every version of me and wanted all of them. I didn't really see her for 2 days. We passed in meetings, crossed in hallways, stood in elevator hushes. No words, no touch, barely a glance. It was as if the moment on her desk my hands braced on her thighs. Her mouth breaking against mine had been erased, buried under layers of roles and responsibility and silence. But it wasn't gone, not even close. It thrummed in my blood, in how my body reacted to her voice drifting from across the floor, in the prickle in my fingers when I remembered her skin under my palms. I doubted she'd forgotten either. Then the text arrived. 3 words. Tonight, my place. No punctuation, no context. A command more than an invitation. I stared at the screen long after it dimmed, heart already racing not just with anticipation, but with the truth. I was going. No hesitation, no doubt, and that terrified me. I reached her penthouse just before 9. I'd never been there, but it was exactly as I'd pictured. Glass and steel, clean lines, cool light, art that looked as expensive and untouchable as she did. She opened the door, barefoot silk pajama pants, a white button-down loosened at the collar, the slope of her clavicle exposed. Her hair was down, for once messy, beautiful, human. Come in, she said. I did. She didn't kiss me, didn't touch me. She simply led the way and gestured toward the living room. I followed, pulse pounding, unsure if I was here to be wanted, dismissed, or both. She poured 2 glasses of wine and sat across from me. I haven't stopped thinking about you. The words came quiet, controlled but honest. I haven't stopped thinking about you either, I said. That's a problem, she replied. Why? Because I don't know how to want you without ruining everything else. Then ruin it, I whispered, just for tonight. She stared at me for a long, breathless moment. Then she stood, walked away. I followed her into the hallway, down a corridor lined with more art, more silence. She opened a door and stepped into a walk-in closet the size of a studio apartment. The far wall was filled with suits. Men's suits, ties, shoes, cufflinks. My mouth went dry. This was my father's, she said, running her hand over a black jacket. He wanted a son. I gave him profits instead. Why are you showing me this? Because I want to see you in it. My heart stopped. What? She turned, eyes burning. Put it on here. Yes. I hesitated. You want me to be Victor again? No, she said. I want you to be yourselves. All of them. The soft parts, the sharp edges, the versions of you that you keep hiding under skirts and apologies. I want all of it. Slowly, I removed my blouse, my pants. I stepped into the dark slacks she handed me, buttoned the shirt, slid into the jacket. She watched every movement with the stillness of a hunter. When I turned to face her, something in her eyes cracked open. You're beautiful like this, she whispered. You look like temptation. And you look like surrender, I murmured, stepping toward her. I backed her up until she hit the edge of a low leather bench. Her breath hitched. I undid the top button of her shirt, then the next, until her chest was bare and flushed and rising with shallow breaths. Is this what you want? I asked. To be undressed by the version of me that scares you most. You don't scare me, she said, but her voice was shaking. You just make me feel. I leaned down, brushing my mouth against hers. Then feel me. We didn't rush. There was no performance here. No audience. Just hands, lips, heat. Her skin against mine, her pulse beneath my mouth. She let me push her down onto the bench, spread her legs, kiss her until she was panting and grasping and arching under me. She moaned my name. Not Jordan, not even Victor, just mine. Later, wrapped in the sheets of her massive bed, her head on my chest, she finally asked the question I'd been waiting for. What are we doing? I ran my fingers through her hair. Something reckless. And if someone finds out, let them. I could lose everything. Then lose it, I said. But don't lose this. She was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, stay. I kissed her temple always. But neither of us said what we were really thinking. That this wasn't just an affair. That we were already into deep. That lines had blurred beyond repair. That I didn't just want her body. I wanted her name, her secrets, her soul. That I wasn't just pretending to be a man in a suit. That I was discovering something inside myself that had been waiting, buried, for someone brave enough to see it. That Valerie Locke had become my obsession and I had become hers. We kept pretending that was the only way to survive it. In the office, she was still Valerie Locke, the indomitable, untouchable woman in heels sharper than her words, whose presence made interns stammer and board members blink twice before speaking. And I was just Jordan again, her assistant, her employee, her perfectly forgettable shadow. But behind closed doors, in the quiet hours after everyone had left the building, in her penthouse, when she unbuttoned my shirt like a secret she didn't want to say out loud, we stopped pretending completely. At least that's what I thought until she started pulling away. It was small at first. Missed texts, late replies, less eye contact in the hallways. Then came the meeting, an internal project presentation where she didn't even glance at me once. I stood in the back with my tablet, invisible, while she complimented to interns for an idea I'd handed her myself the night before, naked in her bed. Afterward, I waited in her office while everyone cleared out, my chest tight, my hands restless. She walked in 10 minutes later, her eyes unreadable. You should go home, she said. There's nothing else today. Nothing else today? I echoed. Or nothing else at all. She looked up and for the first time in days, I saw the war behind her expression. Don't do this here. Why not? You had no problem using my ideas in there. You gave them to me. Yeah, I always give them to you. That's not the point. Then what is the point? She asked, voice harder now. That you want more than this? More than what we agreed to. What did we agree to, Valerie? I asked, stepping closer. Because last time I checked, there weren't any contracts involved when you begged me to stay the night. She flinched. Keep your voice down. Why? I snapped, scared someone might realize the ice cream actually melts when I touch her. That did it. Her jaw locked and her entire body shifted into defense. You knew what this was, did I? I whispered because every time you looked at me like I was the only thing you wanted, it felt a hell of a lot like something real. She didn't answer. She walked to her desk, gathered some papers, pretended like I wasn't still standing there with my heart exposed and my throat burning. Don't shut me out, I said, voice breaking now. Don't pretend like this didn't mean something to you. She froze, and for a moment, I thought she'd turn around, thought she'd say it. Yes, it meant everything. But instead, she said quietly, "You're dismissed, Jordan." The silence that followed was louder than anything either of us had ever said. I walked out without another word, but not before I saw it. The way her hand trembled when she reached for her pen. The way her shoulders curled inward for just a breath before straightening again. Like regret. Like shame. like she wanted to call me back and didn't know how. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't because it wasn't just heartbreak I felt. It was confusion about who I was now, about what version of myself I'd awakened, about what it meant to have been seen so fully, only to be pushed back into the dark. But something else grew in that quiet, something cold, something fierce. I wouldn't beg for her love. I wouldn't chase a woman who built her identity on keeping people beneath her heel. If she wanted me, she'd have to step off her throne and say it. The next morning, I arrived at work in a three-piece suit. Not Jordan, not Victor, me. Bound chest, slicked hair, charcoal tie, sharp eyeliner, no apologies. Heads turned when I walked through the office, but I didn't stop. And when I stepped into the morning strategy meeting, Valerie looked up and froze. It was only for a second, but I saw it. The way her pupils dilated, the way her breath caught, the way her hand gripped her pen tighter than necessary. She cleared her throat. Let's begin. I took a seat at the far end of the table. My legs spread casually, one arm draped across the chair beside me. She didn't look at me again, but she felt me. Every second of that meeting, she felt me like heat against her skin, and I knew it. I leaned forward when I spoke. I let my voice drop an octave. I tilted my head and smiled like I knew her secrets because I did. I didn't say her name once. I didn't need to. I owned the room in a way I never had before. Not because I was playing a part, but because I had finally stopped hiding. And it rattled her. After the meeting, I turned to leave, but she caught my wrist as I passed. Not hard, just enough. You're making a statement, she said, her voice barely audible. I leaned in, breath brushing her ear. So are you? This isn't a game, Jordan. It never was. She let go. I walked out. She didn't follow, but she watched. That afternoon, I got a message. No name, just a room number. Her penthouse again. I stared at the screen. My hands shook. I didn't move. 10 minutes passed. Then another message. Please. One word. The one I hadn't expected. The one that undid me. I went. She opened the door in silence. No silk. No heels. Just a plain black t-shirt and bare feet. Her eyes were red. I don't know how to do this, she said. Then let me show you. I whispered. I stepped inside. She closed the door. And for once, she didn't lead. She let go. And I didn't just touch her. I held her. All of her. Her fear. Her control. Her craving for something real in a world that demanded she pretend. And when she wrapped her arms around my waist and whispered, "Don't leave," I knew she wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of what it meant to need. But now she needed me anyway. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just stood there with her arms around my waist, holding me like I was the only steady thing in a world she had built on ice and control. Her face was pressed against my chest, her breathing uneven, and I could feel it. Every wall she'd ever constructed, every instinct she'd used to keep people out trembling beneath my touch. Valerie Locke wasn't just letting me in. She was unraveling, and I wasn't going to let her fall alone. I lifted her chin gently, my thumb brushing over the soft curve of her jaw. Her eyes met mine, dark and glassy and open in a way I had never seen. There was no sharpness left, no mask, just her. Say it, I whispered. Say you want me. She shook her head barely. You know I do. Then why are you still scared? Her voice cracked when she spoke. Because wanting you means I lose the version of myself I've spent years perfecting. The one who never needs, never bends. I don't know who I am without that. I leaned in, my forehead resting against hers, breath mingling. Then let me find out with you. Her lips parted like she was about to protest, but I didn't let her. I kissed her slow, deep. No urgency, no pretense, just the kind of kiss that tells the truth. Her arms tightened around me like she believed it, like she needed to. We moved through the penthouse like we were rediscovering gravity. Her shirt fell to the floor. My jacket joined it. The binder beneath my shirt came undone, and her hand stilled, hovering over the edge of the fabric. "Wait," she whispered. "You don't have to." "I want to," I said. "I want you to see all of me." She paused, eyes searching mine like she didn't trust herself to deserve it. Then she touched me gently, reverently, her fingers mapping a body that didn't quite follow binary lines. A body I had kept hidden behind layers of fiction and disguise. "You're beautiful," she breathed. "You always have been." That night, she didn't try to dominate me. She didn't take control. She gave it completely. She let me pin her hands over her head, let me kiss her thighs until she trembled, let me push her to the edge and back again. And when she came undone beneath me, her voice breaking with my name, it wasn't power I felt. It was trust. Afterward, we lay tangled in sheets, her head on my chest, her fingers tracing the line of my ribs beneath the soft curve of my breast. She didn't ask me to leave. I didn't even think she remembered the world outside that bed. "I hated you at first," she murmured. "You made me feel too much." I smiled against her hair. "And now you're the only thing that feels real." I kissed her temple. "You make me feel real, too." Silence settled over us again, but it wasn't heavy. It was warm, full. I didn't realize I had fallen asleep until sunlight streamed through the windows, and I woke up to the sound of her soft breathing beside me. I watched her for a long time, hair messy, lips parted, a faint crease between her brows, even in rest, like part of her was still bracing for the next fight. But there was softness there, too. Vulnerability. She didn't know how to hide from me anymore. I kissed her shoulder and slipped out of bed quietly, pulling on one of her oversized dress shirts and wandering into the kitchen. I had just finished making 2 cups of coffee when she appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes tired but warm. "You're still here," she said. "You asked me not to leave." "I didn't think you'd listen." "I always listen to you," I said, "even when you're trying to push me away." She looked at me for a long time, then walked over and took the cup from my hands, her fingers brushing mine. "I should be scared," she murmured. "The way I feel about you, it's not just physical anymore." "I know," I said. "It hasn't been for a while." "You still want me. Even after the way I've treated you, you didn't treat me like anything. You treated yourself like someone who wasn't allowed to feel." "I get it. I've done it, too. But you're not hiding anymore," she said, eyes shining. "Not when you walked into that meeting in a suit and made me want to drop everything, just to touch you." I grinned. "You noticed. I almost ended the meeting early." "You should have. Don't tempt me." I stepped closer, tipped her chin up again. "What happens now?" She swallowed. "I don't know. I've never been with someone like you." "Someone like me?" I arched a brow. "Brave, fluid, hard to define. And you?" I asked. "What are you?" "Terrified," she said, "but stupidly, completely yours." I kissed her again, slow and certain, packing in all the words we hadn't dared say. That afternoon at the office, we behaved as if nothing had shifted. She ran a presentation like a deity, precise, composed. I took my seat in another tailored suit and watched her from across the room. We didn't speak, didn't touch, but the air between us throbbed. When I passed her in the corridor and her fingers skimmed mine for a heartbeat, I knew this wasn't an affair or a performance. It was a beginning we didn't yet know how to name. Whatever it was real. And this time she wasn't hiding. Neither was I. It started with a photo, one grainy, angled shot through the tinted window of a luxury car. Nothing explicit. No faces. No obvious contact. But enough. The blurred outline of Valerie Locke in the back seat, her silhouette unmistakable. And beside her, me. Hair slicked back, jaw clean. The version that didn't answer to Jordan. The one in sharp suits who kissed her like the world wasn't watching. Victor. The blog post hit late Tuesday. No major outlets grabbed it at first. By Wednesday morning, though, it had ricocheted through staff group chats, PR email chains, and Slack threads tagged off the record. Power couple, Or power play? Lock PR's ice queen spotted with mysterious male companion. The office felt too quiet, too polite. Heads lifted as I walked by, then snapped away. I held my posture, kept my expression blank. Deep navy suit, crisp shirt. Binder snug beneath every inch ranged for confidence I wasn't sure I felt. Valerie wasn't in her office. Marisol's desk sat empty, and her calendar showed nothing but I knew better. She was here, tucked out of sight, like I'd once done. By noon, the message arrived. Conference room B now. No signature. When I stepped in, she was at the window, arms folded over a black turtleneck. Hair twisted into a bun that wouldn't quite hold. She looked tired. "Close the door," she said without turning. I did. The silence stretched. "You've seen it," she finally said. "Yes. How bad is it?" "Worse than it looks," I replied. "But not fatal." She turned then and her eyes locked on mine. "I'm not afraid of rumors. You're afraid of truths that feel like rumors. Don't analyze me. Then don't hide from me," I said. "Talk to me like I'm not just the woman you kiss when the lights are off." Her jaw tensed. "This was supposed to be controlled. Then you shouldn't have kissed me like it meant something. You kissed me first and you didn't stop it." Her breath caught, but she didn't argue. "This could cost me everything." "Then why did you let it start?" I asked. "Why did you ask me to put on that suit? Why did you look at me like you wanted to be undone?" Her eyes shimmered, something breaking loose behind them. "Because I did. Still do," I asked. She didn't answer with words. She crossed the room and kissed me hard. Desperate. Her fingers gripped the front of my jacket, tugging me closer like she couldn't get close enough. Like the world was pressing in, and I was the only space left to breathe. "I hate that I need you," she whispered against my mouth. "Then don't call it hate," I said. "Call it love." She flinched. The word hovered in the air between us like smoke. Visible, undeniable. "You don't know what love looks like from someone like me." "Then show me," I whispered. "Let me stay long enough to learn." But her expression shifted. She stepped back. "The board has called an emergency session. They want an explanation." "Then give them one and say what?" "That I'm sleeping with an employee I asked to cross-dress and kiss me in public for PR manipulation." "Say you're in love," I said. "Say you were scared and reckless and messy. Say you're human, and then say you won't apologize for wanting someone who makes you feel alive." She stared at me wide-eyed, unmoving. "You're asking me to destroy my armor." "No," I said. "I'm asking you to stop using it to keep me out." She turned away, her shoulders rising and falling with uneven breath. I walked over, wrapping my arms around her from behind, letting my cheek press to her back. "You don't have to fight the world alone anymore. You make it sound easy." "It's not," I said, "but it's real." She turned in my arms, her fingers brushing the edge of my collar. "What are we even doing?" "Falling in love," I said badly. "Beautifully." Her forehead rested against mine. "And if they take this company from me, then I'll be there when you build something better." That afternoon, Valerie walked into the Astor boardroom in heels that echoed like thunder and a voice that cut like glass. She looked every bit the legend they expected, until she pulled up a photo of the blog post on the screen and said calmly, "I will not address this as a scandal. I will not apologize for a kiss, and I will not hide a relationship. That has changed me more than any merger or deal ever has." The room was silent. Then one man cleared his throat. "You're saying the rumors are true?" "No," she said. "I'm saying they're not rumors. They're mine." When she walked out, she didn't look at me, but she brushed her hand over mine as she passed. And in that touch, I felt everything. The fear, the freedom, the beginning. That night she came to me. No penthouse, no glass tower, just her in jeans and a soft sweater, barefoot on my doorstep. Eyes raw. "I've never done this," she said. "Been someone's." I stepped aside, letting her in. "Then let's start now." And when I kissed her, no roles, no suits, no pretense. I knew this wasn't about power anymore. It was about surrender, the kind that sets you free. She didn't leave that night. She stayed, not because we fell into bed with the kind of fire we'd known before, but because she couldn't stop touching me like she was afraid I'd vanish. We lay tangled together in the dark, skin against skin, and I could feel it in the way her hands moved, careful, reverent, like I was something fragile in a world that never let her hold anything too tightly. You didn't flinch, she whispered when I said it in the Astor boardroom. When I made it real, because I was waiting, I murmured, fingers brushing her jaw. I've been waiting for you to choose me. When someone was actually watching, her lips brushed my shoulder. I don't know how to do this without burning something down. Then burn it, I whispered. Burn it all. But don't walk away from the one thing that makes you feel alive. She didn't answer, not with words. She just held me tighter. The next morning, the world was loud. Headlines, tweets, blogs, photos. Most praised her boldness. Some questioned her professionalism, and a few, just enough to remind us who we were up against, called it a scandal, power imbalance, inappropriate relationship, gender deception. They questioned everything: my identity, her leadership, our motives. What they didn't question was the truth, because it was too visible now to be denied. We loved each other publicly, unapologetically, and for someone like Valerie Locke, that was rebellion in its purest form. The first PR statement came in drafts, carefully crafted, corporate, full of words like reputation, standards, and narrative. Valerie rejected everyone. She called me into her office, eyes tired but blazing. I'm writing it myself. You don't have to, I said gently. I do, she replied, because this time, the story is mine. She didn't write it as a CEO. She wrote it as a woman who had spent years building something indestructible only to realize she didn't want to stand at the top of it alone. The statement read, "What started as a calculated distraction became something that unraveled me in the best possible way. I fell in love. I will not apologize for that. I won't shrink it down to something strategic. And I will not separate who I am from who I love just to preserve anyone else's comfort." The media exploded again, but this time something shifted. People rallied. Other queer professionals started reposting the statement with captions like, "Finally, about time. Visibility matters." A few brave staff members started knocking on her office door just to say, "I'm proud of you." But not everyone was kind. The firm lost a major investor, a quiet one, conservative and faceless, who simply cited image concerns. That loss hit hard. I saw it in the set of her shoulders when the news came in. I saw it in the way she clenched her jaw as she stared out the window later that evening alone in the dark office. "You okay?" I asked from the doorway. She didn't turn around. I gave them everything. Yours, profits, power, one kiss, and it's like none of it ever happened. I crossed the room and stood behind her, resting my hands gently on her hips. "That kiss changed everything, but it didn't erase what you built. Feels like it? Then let's build something they can't touch." She turned slowly, her eyes glassy but fierce. "You do that? Build with me? Even if it means giving up this version of safety we've found?" "Yes," I said, "because I want you, not just the world you made." She pulled me into her arms, then not as a boss, not as someone used to commanding the room, but as a woman who finally let herself fall fully. We stayed late that night, working side by side, rewriting campaigns, restructuring our internal pitch decks, crafting a new language for the brand we'd once pretended didn't belong to us both. She let me lead. I let her lean. For once, there was no performance, just partnership. A week later, she stood beside me at a press event. I wore a gray suit, binder snug beneath it, makeup minimal, hair short and slicked back. No labels, no explanations, just the version of myself that made sense next to her. She wore black, sleek, powerful, her eyes sharper than ever. But her hand found mine under the table, and that small act softened everything. During the Q&A, someone asked, "Do you see this relationship as a liability for the company?" Valerie didn't even flinch. "No, I see it as a revolution." The room froze and then burst into applause. Real applause, not polite noise. Later that night she turned to me and said, "That was the first time I felt proud to be seen." "Good," I told her. "I've been looking at you for a long time." She smiled, not the blade-edged smile she saved for boardrooms and opponents, but something softer, truer. "Think they'll keep talking about us?" "Of course," I said, "but we get to steer the narrative." And she kissed me there on the stage, cameras firing, voices rising not as cover, but as honesty. The calls started before sunrise the next morning: interviews, panels, keynote invites about visibility in leadership, redefining power, breaking gender and relationship norms at work. At first it felt flattering, energizing, proof the world was listening. By week's end, it was clear we'd become a spectacle, a headline, a segment, a case study. They didn't just want Valerie Locke, CEO. They wanted us, our backstory, our bodies, our love pried open and dissected like strategy. "They're not celebrating us," she said one night, voice tight as she dropped her phone onto the marble counter in her penthouse kitchen. "They're consuming us." I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, heart still racing from seeing her on yet another magazine cover. "It's not all bad. It's not supposed to be anything," she snapped, walls climbing back into place the way they do when she's cornered. "It was ours. We never asked to be symbols. We didn't say we didn't, either. I didn't fall in love to inspire people, Jordan," she said. "I fell in love because you made it feel like I didn't have to survive alone. Then why push me away now?" I stepped closer. "Because I don't want to share you with the world." Her voice cracked, low and raw. "I don't want what we have reduced to a headline or a soundbite fodder for comment sections." I took her hand, threading my fingers through hers. "They'll talk no matter what. Let them. We still decide what's real. We decide what this means." She was quiet for a long beat. Then, almost a whisper, "I hate that you're better at this than I am." "At what?" "At letting go," she said. "At knowing when to stop fighting." "That's not true," I said gently. "You just spent your whole life thinking love was a weakness. Wasn't it?" I shook my head. "Not when it's real." She exhaled and leaned forward, resting her forehead against mine. "What do we do now?" We stopped letting them write the story for us. The next day, we did something radical. We disappeared. We left the city, shut off our phones. We didn't tell anyone where we were going. No statement, no photo up. Just the two of us driving north until the glass towers disappeared in the rearview mirror. And the silence returned to something soft, not threatening. We found a cabin near a cedar, quiet, off-grid, surrounded by trees and fog. She hated the lack of control at first. No email, no signal, no schedule. But after the first day, I saw her breath differently. Her eyes softened, her voice quieted, and at night she slept beside me without clinging so tight. "You know what the scariest part is," she said one night, her head on my chest as rain tapped softly against the windows. "It's not that I'm in love with you. It's that I don't know who I am when I'm not performing." I traced lazy circles on her back. "Then let's find out together." She looked up at me with those eyes, powerful, haunted, searching. "You say it so easily because it is easy when it's right." She kissed me then, not like someone desperate to own, but like someone ready to share. A week later, we returned together, different. We didn't hide anymore. Not in the office, not in public, not behind words like strategy or optics. And the world noticed again. But this time we weren't giving it explanations, only truth. She reinstated me not as her assistant, but as her equal, director of creative strategy. I had earned it long before our lips ever touched. The board resisted. HR tried to raise flags, but she stood beside me, hand in mine, and said, Either evolve or get out of my way. Half of them quit. The other half stayed. And we rebuilt Lock PR in our image. Fearless, fluid, human. That Friday, a package arrived at my desk. No note, just a black velvet box with a ring inside. Sleek, minimal, gold and graphite twisted together. 2 metals, different fused. I turned around slowly, and she was standing in the doorway of my office, arms crossed, a rare smile tugging at her lips. "You're not proposing in front of the whole staff," I said, heart-thudding. "Of course not," she said. "You're proposing to me." I blinked. "Excuse me? You're the one who taught me what it means to stay," she said. "So ask me, and I'll say yes." I stood, walked across the room, and dropped to one knee. Not for the world, not for a headline, but for her. "Marry me," I whispered, "and let's keep writing the story. They'll never understand." She leaned down, kissed me breathless, and murmured against my lips, "Only if you wear the suit." We didn't want a big wedding. Neither of us had dreamed of flower walls, or champagne towers, or rows of guests with stiff smiles and phones held high. We didn't want to be looked at. We wanted to be seen, really seen. So we stripped everything down. No venue, no sponsors, no cameras, just us, a Cedar Lake, a cabin, a handful of people who had witnessed what we had become together, and to rings waiting to be worn, heavy with meaning. I wore the suit, black, tailored. The one she said made me look like temptation itself. But this time, it wasn't a disguise. It wasn't Victor, or Jordan, or anyone in between. It was just me. My body, my voice, my presence completely mine. And when I turned at the altar to watch her walk barefoot across the mossy path between the trees, her white silk dress moving like water around her legs, her hair loose and wild for the first time in public, I swore I forgot how to breathe. Valerie Locke had spent her entire career commanding silence with presence alone. But here now in front of me, she looked like surrender, not weakness, trust. When she reached me, she didn't wait. She took my hand and didn't let go. "You scare me," she whispered, "because I'd give up everything I've ever built just to have this. Then you finally understand how I felt since the moment you kissed me." Our vows were short. We didn't need poetry, just honesty. I promised to never let her forget how it felt to be loved, not for her power, but for her truth. She promised to stop hiding behind her titles and start living as someone who deserved everything she had and everything she now had with me. "I used to think control made me powerful," she said softly, voice trembling. "But loving you has made me braver than anything I ever conquered." There wasn't a dry eye among the few witnesses. Marisol cried. My sister cried. Even Valerie's stone-faced former mentor blinked more than usual. When the officiant said, "You may kiss," she didn't wait. She pulled me in like I belonged to her, like she belonged to me. And when our lips met, slow, sure, sacred, it didn't feel like a beginning or an ending. It felt like something that had always been waiting to be claimed. After the ceremony, we danced by firelight. No music, just the sound of wind through the trees and the crackle of flames. She danced with her eyes closed, head against my chest, swaying like she'd never known stillness until that moment. "You're the only person who's ever seen all of me," she said, "and you didn't run. You're the only person who's ever let me be seen," I whispered, "and I didn't have to beg for it." We didn't talk about the office or the brand or the legacy she'd worked so hard to protect. None of that mattered now. This was ours. Unbranded, unscripted, undeniable. Later, in our room, overlooking the Cedar Lake, she stood at the window wearing nothing but the ring I had slipped on her finger hours before. She looked over her shoulder, eyes soft but burning. "Say it again." I crossed the room, wrapped my arms around her from behind, and whispered into her neck. "I love you," louder. "I love you," I repeated, this time against her skin. "I love you in ways I didn't think I was allowed to love anyone." She turned in my arms, and for once, She didn't look like Valerie Locke, feared CEO and press magnet. She just looked like the woman I'd fallen for when she handed me a folder and told me to wear a suit and kiss her like it wasn't pretend. "I never thought I'd say this," she said, "but maybe you were the plan all along." I smiled. "You saying I'm part of your brand now?" "No," she said, "I'm saying you're my home." We made love that night the way people do when they fought too hard not to reach this place. When the armor is gone, when the masks have melted, when the body no longer feels like a battlefield but a bridge. I kissed every part of her. She held every part of me. There was no pretending left, only presence. And when we lay tangled in the sheets hours later, chest to chest, breath sinking slow, I whispered, "Do you regret it?" "Not for a second," she said. "But I do have one question." "What?" She grinned. "Do I get to keep the suit?" I laughed. "Only if you promise to let me take it off every night. Deal?" In the months that followed, the world kept talking. Articles, panels, debates. They tried to frame us with headlines, tried to capture what we were with words that always fell short. Forbidden queer workplace scandal turned romance. The love story that challenged corporate norms. But they never got it right. Because what we had wasn't a scandal. It was survival. It was transformation. It was us. And we never stopped choosing it. Not when things got complicated. Not when clients walked. Not when people tried to make us smaller than we were. Every day she strode into work in heels and fire. Every night she came home to me barefoot, soft, still mine. I kissed her every morning before coffee, and she smoothed my collar each time I wore a suit. When people asked how it began, she'd always smile and say, "My assistant wore a suit and kissed me like she meant it." And thank you so much for your support, whether you're liking, commenting, sharing, or sending your super thanks. You make all the difference here on the channel. See you in the next video.